until you are ready to avoid feedback, echoing, and background noise. Make sure you unmute to speak and remute when finished. All board members, please turn on your cameras during the meeting, and staff, please turn on your cameras when speaking and turn them off when finished. Board members will be advised to use the raise hand feature in Zoom when action and discussion items are presented, and I will call on each of you when it is your turn to speak. The public may comment on items covered on the agenda during item 1.3 or may do so at the time each item is considered. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes per comment. To participate in the public comment portion from your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please raise your Zoom hand when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on. You will be notified when it is your turn to speak, and then please unmute when requested. To participate in public comment via phone, when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on, dial *9 to raise your hand. Phone participants will be called on by the last 2 digits of their phone number. When it is your turn to speak, dial *6 to unmute, *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute. When you are finished with your public comment, staff will remute you. Please be familiar with the last 2 digits of your phone number, and these instructions are also found on the first page of the notice for today's meeting. We will use the following procedure for approving items and taking public comments. I will introduce each agenda item, then ask for staff's presentation. I will ask for questions from board members. Please remember to raise your hand. I will then call for public comments. The board may then ask additional questions and discuss further, including taking additional public comment. Once the item is concluded, I will ask for a motion and a second for action items. After any further discussion, the board secretary will call for roll call votes. Any PowerPoint presentations made today and shown over the video can be viewed on the GSA website. Secretary King, would you please take the roll?
When I call your name, please respond by saying present. Director Atkins?
Present.
Director Cooper?
Present.
Director Gibbs?
Present.
Vice President Gutzeit?
Present.
Director Martin?
Present.
We have Director David Ridman, an alternate for Director Rice Biden today.
Present.
And President Natoli.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kang. We're moving on to section 1 of the agenda, item 1.3, public comments. Ms. Kang, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Is there any members of the public who wish to make a public comment at this time? Seeing none. There's no public comment.
Thank you very much. Item 1.4 is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Director Cooper.
I'll second that. Martin.
Is there any discussion? Secretary Kang, will you take the vote?
Director Atkins, your vote?
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote?
Aye.
Vice President Gutzeit, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
Yes.
Director Ridman, your vote?
Yes.
And President Natoli, your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda is approved.
Then item 2 is approval of the consent calendar for section 2. Do I have a motion for approving the consent calendar?
Gibbs, so moved. Cooper, second.
Thank you, Director Cooper. Any discussion?
Yes. Get my hand up here. Yes,
Yes.
President Natoli. I have one possible correction for Junie if she would like to take it on item 1, minutes from the April 5th, 2021 meeting. Page 4, item 4, I think you left the T out of my name when I nominated you to be president and Maria Gusite to be vice president. If you could correct that, that would be great.
My apologies, Director Mountain. I would definitely correct that. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Martin. With that change, can I get a motion and a second?
I
For
think,
But there's a change being made, so
okay,
I think we're amending the motion. So as amended, with the minutes as amended, may I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved as amended.
Second, Director Gibbs.
Thank you, Director Gibbs. Any discussion? Further discussion? All right, can we get a roll call vote? Ms. Kang?
Director Atkins, your vote?
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote?
Aye.
Vice President Gusite, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
yes,
Director Ridman, your vote?
Abstain. I was not at the meeting and Russ didn't get a chance to approve them.
Thank you. President Natoli, your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. The consent calendar has been changed with the amendment to the minutes.
Very well.
Did we take public comment on that agenda item?
No, we did not.
Okay,
Do we need to take public comment on that?
I believe so.
Is there any public comment on either the approval of the agenda or the approval of the consent calendar? The consent calendar includes approving our minutes from April 5th, 2021 meeting and the approval of the rotational schedule for board president and vice president.
There is no public comment at this time.
Very well, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Cole. I think we're fine then to move on to section 3, discussion and/or action items. Item 3.1 is an action item to adopt the fiscal year 2021-22 budget for the agency. Mr. Veer-Goots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. Good afternoon, directors. Nice to see you again. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay, thank you. So we're here to talk to your board about adoption of the 21-22 fiscal year budget. The last time we talked with your board about the budget was in May 2020. And consistent with how we've been doing these budget updates in the past, we have corrected or updated any previous year's numbers based on actuals, and also are proposing estimated budgets, not for your board's adoption, but estimated budget for next fiscal year. The action today is just adoption of the 21-22 budget. And so I will jump into it. This year, we've added a 22-23 budget category. We're late in the GSP development. We're starting to look towards implementing the GSP. And so we've added another year to the budget tables. Key budget changes since last time are like the previous time. We've had deferral of some costs, timing, and we also have some refined budget numbers now for post-GSP adoption activities that we are getting our arms around now. That wasn't something we could do back in May because as we're developing the GSP, we're learning more about the kinds of post-GSP adoptions that are anticipated. So we're seeking your board's approval of the 21-22 budget today. We still have the two categories, SCV water staff support and ad buys, and then consultant costs. We have the same revenue categories: member contributions, grant reimbursement, and additional member contributions. So I'm going to go through and review some tables with your board here. This is table 1. This is the estimated staff costs and ad buys. The proposed 21-22 budget, you'll see the bottom line number here is $114,000. That's consistent with our earlier estimate. We're also estimating a 22-23 budget level, which is similar, that reflects a transition from GSP development to GSP implementation. Estimated consultant costs are more detailed than what I just showed you. This is a roll-up table. Your board memo has additional detail in it. We have updated the consultant cost estimate for GSP development for fiscal year 21-22 to reflect $668,191. There is still some contingency left. And so the total cost estimate for technical development is $702,688 for 21-22. You might remember in past years, we had contingency funds in multiple years, but due to board action this last year, we have allocated contingency funding to both GSI Water Solutions, our technical consultant, and CV Strategies. So right now, about $35,000 in contingency, or $34,500 in contingency remains for the GSI contract. Changes, the bottom table here, table 2A, you can see we've got an increase budget above our earlier estimate to the tune of about $255,000. Much of that comes from deferred work. As you know, we've updated you in the past. We've had difficulties getting out and spending money in the field with putting piezometers in and other work. Some of that's related to the pandemic. Some of that's related to site access agreements. And so we didn't spend the money we thought we would. We think the work is still important though, and we're recommending it be included, carried forward into 21-22. Administration. There have been some changes in this cost. In 2021, so this was the last year, we had $125,000 budgeted for rate studies. We had $50,000 budgeted for a pre-GSP adoption rate study and $75,000 for a post-GSP adoption rate study. We have moved that $75,000 into fiscal year 21-22 in the event your board determines that we need to commence a rate study to look for setting extraction fees, for example, to help fund implementation of the GSP. The $50,000 that was in 2021 for a pre-GSP rate study has been eliminated. We didn't need it. We didn't need the funds to supplement developing the groundwater sustainability plan because the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, the JPA, fully funded it. So in terms of changes for 21-22, we have an increase of $75,000. That is because we had deferred costs. We're now recommending we pick that cost up in 21-22. And you can see the net difference, even incorporating fiscal year 22-23, is slightly lower than in the past, about 22,000 lower. Table 2, estimated consultant costs. So these are for post-GSP adoption activities. This is where the largest cost increases have come into this year's budget. As I mentioned earlier, as part of developing the plan We've had to look at where our data gaps are, what we need to do to fill them, and how we need to monitor moving forward. And so we have included additional categories here. The first one is addressing data gaps. And we mentioned this in the staff report, but some of these items have a little bit of overlap with GSP development, but it's hard to disaggregate, so I just want to mention it. So the first one, addressing data gaps, surveying wells, Thalweg, domestic well sampling. We have money in the budget for domestic well sampling. That's one of the suggested monitoring approaches that are in the draft monitoring plan and that your board will also see in the draft GSP. Benchmark elevation monitoring, GDE evaluations if needed. And this is just 21-22, filling these data gaps. And then database maintenance. You'll see database maintenance in a lot of these rows. The GSA has developed a database, and it will continue to develop it and populate it as we move to GSP implementation. Why do we do that? We need to put information in the database to provide information for the annual reports that are needed for DWR and other information. Moving down the line, these next three rows that have the monitoring, reporting, and outreach, these are categories that get to continuing of things like surveying. This next row has an outreach plan component for doing outreach to private well owners to talk with them about reporting extractions. It includes funds for database maintenance. The next row has to do with promoting best management practices for private well operators. You know, the water agency here has a robust approach for talking about conservation and best management practices, but that's for water agency customers. The GSA does not have such an approach, and so this would include some funding to talk to private well owners about best management practices for private well use. The next row is more into basin-wide monitoring and preparation of the required annual report. We've also got money in here for a GDE evaluation in 22-23 if needed. So all told, with the GSP development, you're aware that we've been talking about using triggers to evaluate any potential impacts to groundwater dependent ecosystems. And so this budget includes funding to help with that if needed. And that would be if we reach the trigger levels. We also have $50,000, not in this year, but next year, to respond to comments on the submitted GSP. We also have money for this year in 21-22 for project development. There's a very brief discussion in your board memo about evaluating using some excess water to add water into the area just upstream of the Placerita Nature Center. That's something that we will continue to look at. And so we've added money in the budget for that. So total for 21-22 is $282,000. 22-23 is $294,000. And you see the bottom line number for consultant costs here is $1.080 million. Changes. So table 2C talks about changes from last time. So our earlier budget in May 2020, we didn't have a lot to go on. We budgeted $25,000 for implementation. Of course, now we know that implementation is much more involved. And so there's a significant change from the previous year's budget. The budget in front of you today for this item is much more informed just because we've been building the GSP. I expect these numbers to change some as well. The draft GSP will be released. We will continue to refine projects and management actions. Your board will also help us as needed with that. But this is our best estimate right now for 21-22. Moving on to the summary. So we've walked through tables 1 and 2. That will be shown on this next summary table. We'll talk about grant reimbursement, additional revenue required. So we've talked about these first 2 rows in the table. The estimated cost is $1.194 million. So this is the 3rd row down in fiscal year 21-22. We do have some revenue coming in that offsets that. We have projections for round 2 and round 3 grant revenues in the $550-ish thousand ranges. We will seek to maximize spending or receiving that revenue. And I think we'll get close. There is something that we mention in the budget report, and I'll mention it now. The downstream landowner, 5 Point, is looking to install piezometers in their property. And the budget implications of that to our budget are not yet known, but these would be piezometers that are in line with what the GDE monitoring program looked like. So that's something we will continue to evaluate. But the bottom line is we will maximize grant reimbursement for 21-22 to the extent that we can, and I think we'll do well with that. Member agency contributions, there have been no changes in that. Additional revenue required. In the past, SCV Water has picked up this additional revenue required per the JPA and the Administrative Services Agreement. It can do that. The additional revenue required amount has gone up for 21-22 because of the deferral of costs and these additional costs for GSP implementation. Changes. So the May 2020 budget had a 21-22 estimate of $607,000. This year's budget, proposed budget for 21-22 is much higher. So at 1.19 million, that's a difference of $587,000. So summary, the budget that we use for GSP development covers the first 4 fiscal years. There's a little bit of overlap in year 4 with GSP implementation. We've added a 5th year to the budget for the first full year of GSP implementation as the 22-23 year. We've talked about the revisions, the deferred work, the GSP implementation, and our recommendation is that your board adopt the proposed 21-22 budget in the budget tables in the memo, and pursuant to our JPA, replace those tables in the Administrative Services Agreement with today's tables 1, 2, and 3. And so that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
President Natoli, you're muted.
Yes, proper procedures are always important. Vice President Goodside, you have some comments or questions, please proceed.
Thank you. Just timing issues. I'm fine with the budget. It's clear that most of the change for this year's projection was the deferred costs coming on now. But I just wanted to know timing. On longer term rate issues, as we go to implementation, when will there be a discussion about whether the agencies continue to be funding it or we look at another mechanism? That's question number one. So when do we discuss the rate issues long term? And then second, also as we go into implementation, are we going to hear more about some of these project details, like the placerita issue or other projects that are coming up? I understand the cost now is researching the projects, but will we, going forward as part of a budget, be giving the thumbs up or thumbs down to some projects, or how is that going to be handled in future years?
Yeah, great questions. Your first question had to do with when would we revisit a rate study to help with GSP implementation. I think the logical time for that would be later this calendar year as your board begins to review the draft GSP and certainly as it considers the final GSP. At that time, we'll have more refined numbers for GSP implementation. So that would be a sort of the logical next step for that.
Okay.
And then when your board will know more about the specifics, you'll see specifics in the draft GSP, such as in the chapter for monitoring and projects and management actions. There will be a series of sections that talk about these components, provide more information about what they are and even budgeting for them.
Okay, so is there going to be, there'll be proposed projects prior to them going in? Are they being evaluated to see if they are the most cost effective, or is everything going in, or you know, will we see a vetted list or a larger list and have to vet it later on the projects?
You will see a vetted list. Right now, the projects and management actions and monitoring, which largely govern these implementation costs, are fairly lean. Much of the money goes into monitoring. Right now, there are no formal projects that are recommended for the GSP, and that's because the basin is in good shape. And so what we will be doing between now and sharing the draft GSP with your board is looking at potential costs for this effort with the area upstream from the Placerita Nature Center. And we can talk about it at that point. You know, in the biggest picture, it's not a project that will be recommended for compliance with the GSP. It isn't something that we have to do. It's something that would be an optional project that your board could consider.
Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Viergoots. Do we have any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, let's move on to public comment. Do we have any comment from the public?
It looks like Director Atkins has a question or comment.
All right, let's go back to Director Atkins, please.
All right, really quick, Mr. Viergoots. I noticed that in some of your budget line items, you have the groundwater dependent ecosystems evaluation on several different lines. Did you explain why it appears on the different line items?
Sure. Of course.
You did, or will you?
Director Atkins, I don't know if I did a good job explaining it. Let me hit it again.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we have Director Atkins, is this the table you're recalling?
I think one, go back another one. Oh, there, yeah, it's on the first, it's in the first one,
Mhm.
and it's in the fourth one. And I want to know what the difference is. And I'm just, is it a duplication, or just explain to me why it's there twice, please?
Well, sure. So on the first one, it's included for this fiscal year in the event we need to do it. In hindsight, perhaps we could have included, let me stop for a minute. So the GDE evaluations that you see here, the first one is for 21-22. The other one that you see on this first, second, third, fourth row down is for 22-23. So I think
that 70,000 isn't 21-22. It's that 70,000 is part of the 90,000 in 22-23.
They're not part of, they're each per year. So 70,000 for 21-22, 90 for 22-23 on this fourth row.
And the first row includes 64,000, which includes another groundwater dependent ecosystem evaluation. I'm just wondering if we're being duplicative. That's my question.
We're not, but we could say it better. For 21-22, there's money in the budget for a GDE evaluation, just one in 21-22. The next GDE evaluation we have is in 22-23, and that only shows up in 1 year. The reason they're separate is the first one is really just when we're hitting the ground running. It's part of addressing data gaps. The second one is during implementation. So,
Rick, hi, Rick.
That's
Can
what
you
I
hear me?
needed. Thank you.
Rick, this is Jeff. Can you hear me?
yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, just to add to what you said, that first one that you see there includes some additional investigation of potential GDEs up in the upland areas that had been identified but not included in the original evaluation. So we wanted to go have a biologist take a look at those areas to see if they needed to be monitored in the future and evaluated in the future. The second one has to do with further development of our strategy and approach for correlating monitoring data, the actual water level monitoring data, with predicted water levels that we expect in the alluvium within the GDE area. So there's some additional work that was needed to do that kind of calibration, so to speak. And that's what's in that fiscal year 22-23 budget.
You're right. It probably could have been done differently, so it doesn't look as though it's duplicative, because in this table, it appears, had it been qualified differently with maybe a couple other adjectives, it might have been cleaner. So I just don't want to call us, I don't want us to be called on the carpet later for it.
Thank you. It's an excellent point.
All right, and I don't see any other hands raised. So then we'll move on to public comment. Ms. Kang, would you like me to call the public speakers, or would you like to do that?
Whichever you prefer, President Natoli. I'm happy to do both.
I would prefer that you call the public speakers, please.
Sure thing. We have 2 public comments at this time. Ms. Faulkner, whenever you're ready, you can unmute and speak and make your public comment.
Thanks, Junie. I just have a question about the Placerita project, because I don't remember hearing about it before, and it's possible that I missed a meeting or wasn't in the room for that particular item. But where is the water coming from? Who proposed this project? And how does the project get on the list of prospective projects? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fortner. Mr. Virgutz, can you address those questions?
Yes, President Nisoli. Ms. Fortner, this project was one of the projects listed as an optional project in the draft technical memorandum on projects and management actions. So it is something that we'd shared with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee in the past.
I don't remember.
And it's something that we had considered internally, that it might be something, the project, Ms. Fortner, could be something that could be addressed without a large capital outlay. And this gets to your question, which I think was, how would it work? And I might not have your question exactly right, but the bottom line is that there's a water line that goes up Placerita Canyon, not far from this area. And so the concept would be to tap into that line if excess water was available. So I'm not sure if I got all of your questions.
Mr. Virgutz, the last one was, how does a project make it on the list? What are your criteria?
So, well, we've had a series of workshops where we've talked to the public and the SAC about projects and optional projects. And so at this point, we've taken that input. The next opportunity for people to comment on this would be when the draft GSP comes out. We're not at this point soliciting project ideas, but certainly somebody could make a comment that they wanted something else evaluated.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Virgutz, and thank you for your questions, Ms. Fortner. And our next speaker, Ms. Kang.
We have Ms. Cattell. You may unmute and make your public comment, Ms. Cattell, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. This will be a very quick comment. I just was also curious about the Placerita project. Where exactly was that going to be from the nature center? I mean, I'm assuming it's upstream from the nature center, but if you could give me an idea of exactly the area you were talking about, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cattell. I will, I don't have a map in front of me right now. I wish I did. It's a ways up from the nature center. There is a trailhead that drops off of Placerita Canyon Road that goes into the upstream portion of the nature center that we would possibly use for tapping in to the main water line. So it's a ways up from the nature center, Ms. Cattell. And I see Dirk has his camera on too.
Yeah, basically the areas that can refer to as the Walker Ranch trailhead.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Marks.
Yeah.
At least that's the concept at this time. It's in very early stages of planning.
Very well. All right, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Cattell, for your question. I do not see any other comments. This is an action item. Do we have a motion to adopt the proposed fiscal year 21-22 budget as detailed and replace the administrative services agreement Exhibit A with tables 1, 2, and 3? I need a motion and a second.
So moved, Director Martin.
Thank you.
Seconded,
Director Cooper.
Very good. Thank you. Is there any additional discussion? All right. Ms. Kang, will you call the vote?
Director Atkins, your vote?
yes.
Director Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote?
Aye.
Vice President Gutzeit, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
Yes.
Director Ridman, your vote?
Yes.
And President Otola, your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 3.1 has passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 3.2 is an information item, an overview of the GSA Groundwater Sustainability Plan Projects and Management Actions Public Workshop held on June 2nd, 2021. Ms. Bravo, welcome and please proceed.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me today. It's going to be a very short report because there were not very many comments in this round. So just really quickly, we met on June 2nd of 2021. The meeting at a glance, there were 34 total participants and only 2 questions and no feedback. So nobody did any online forums. This one had, in terms of normal turnout, normally we're at like 55, 54 in that range. So this was less. And then the questions and feedback was also less. So even of the people who showed up, there were not a lot of questions with this one. I guess it was pretty straightforward. The workshop questions and feedback are that somebody continues to raise the red flag about the threshold levels, wanting to know about how quickly they can make the change. And then the other question is, how does the water input at Old Castaic School in the north constitute adding water on the east side? So those were the only 2 questions. There was no presentation feedback, just plan feedback. And that one person said that the thresholds were set too low. And again, just as a reminder, we take these general statements and we include them in the public feedback report. We also make changes that are appropriate based on all of the other mitigating factors, and then specific corrections are addressed specifically. So for example, there was the wrong GDE map in the presentation and we corrected and reposted it ASAP. So just kind of, no one's perfect, but we try. And when we have an error, we change that very quickly. So that's the entirety of this report. We did not have a lot to report on this time.
Very well. Sometimes that's a nice way to go. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, do we have any public speakers who would like to make comments or ask questions?
There is no, hold on, there's one public comment. Ms. Cattell, whenever you're ready.
Thank you for letting me speak again. I'd just like to mention that I felt that we missed the mark in getting public participation. It was very difficult from the information that was sent out to see exactly what you were signing up for. And I hope Ms. Bravo will contact me and we could talk about ameliorating some of the problems that showed up on this last workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other follow-up comments from the board or members of the public? Seeing none. Again, this was an information item and no action is required. We're moving on to item 3.3. This is also an information item, status of the groundwater model peer review. Mr. Veer-Goots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Tolley. I'd like to introduce BJ Leckler and Nate Brown from Jacobs Engineering. They have prepared this presentation for us today. And it's something that we have shared with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and we thought it would be useful to share with your board as well. So with that, BJ and Nate, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourselves and then begin with the presentation.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Rick. Good afternoon, members of the board, staff, and other attendees. I'm BJ Leckler. I'm a hydrogeologist with Jacobs and the project manager of SCV's groundwater model that's being used to support development of the GSP. And so we're here, we're going to provide a summary of the project and then the overall status. Next slide. So first, what is a peer review? A peer review is an independent evaluation by experts in the same field as those producing the work. And it involves getting feedback on the input, assumptions, methodology, and the results of those work products. The reason for the peer review, it benefits the work by providing a fresh perspective from individuals other than those that are preparing the work itself, an independent assessment of the validity of the work product for its intended use. Slide. SCV had a number of tasks associated with their grant with DOR for preparing the GSP, and one of those which Jacobs has been tasked to assist with is arranging for an expert peer review of the critical components of the groundwater flow model. And so that review consisted of reviewing the model calibration and refinement of the model's quantification of the groundwater and surface water exchanges, reviewing the suitability of the model for informing the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives that are set in the GSP. As part of the project, we've held 3 meetings between the groundwater modeling team and the peer review panel. There's been recommendations for incremental improvements to the model that could be completed during development of the GSP, as that may be completed during implementation of the GSP. And then finally, we developed a report that describes the key work and the appropriateness of the model for developing the GSP. And so the expert review panel, or the ERP members convened for this project, consist of Dr. with United Water Conservation District, and he's a reviewer from the downstream basin. We also have Mr. Jim Rum with Environmental Simulations. He's an independent reviewer. He's an expert in the field of groundwater modeling, and he's also a developer of a widely used groundwater software modeling interface for ModFlow, which is the code used for this model. And then my colleague, Nate Brown, he's also an independent reviewer. He's also an expert in the field of groundwater modeling, and he has been leading the ERP review process. And I'm going to turn it over to Nate, and he's going to go into a little more detail on the project as well as this.
Thank you, BJ. Make sure I'm unmuted. I am. Good. So just really quick organization and communication chart here. So as BJ mentioned, I was to lead this expert review panel. You can see in terms of a basic communication flow chart, we had really good open dialogue among the ERP panelists, Jim Rumbaugh with ESI, Jason Sun with United. We were contracted directly, or Jacobs was, by SCV Water. During the review process, we had full access to GSI. So we were not limited in any way to ask questions as they came up, ask for some clarification. So this was the general organization and communication flow chart. Just a really quick note on the tools that have been used to develop this model, this groundwater flow model. In terms of the kind of the underlying calculation engine, the thing that's doing most of the solving of the the differential equations, the problems, is called ModFlow USG, and it's a very good code. It's in the public domain. It's free to the public, and of the ModFlow family of codes, it's the most flexible in terms of its grid design, or among the most flexible, I should say. Certainly been through the paces with regard to being benchmarked and verified and subject to scientific review. Really good documentation, it's in wide use, and really good technical support. So I provided a website here. Folks are interested in learning more about ModFlow USG. And then kind of what's typical in industry is for folks these days to use graphical user interfaces to manage the files, both input files that feed ModFlow USG, but then as well as after you run the models, there's a series of output files that need to be processed. So in this case, they've opted to use Groundwater Vistas as that GUI, that graphical user interface. This is commercially available, so it's not free to the public, but there are no restrictions on who can buy, a license for it. And it's also well documented and really, really wide use and great technical support. As BJ mentioned, Groundwater Vistas was written by Jim Rumbaugh, one of the ERP panelists. And so he provided very useful input as questions around the interface came up during the reviews. In terms of the actual documents that we reviewed, there were 3 of them. The first was this draft report as of September of last year, the development of the numerical groundwater flow model, followed by the water budget development report. That was in October of 2020. And then the sustainable management criteria section of the GSP, and that was in February of 2021. All 3 were draft versions of the reports. And so in terms of the overall process, again, we reviewed these reports. Jacobs would host meetings to discuss the review panel's comments. It gave us an opportunity with GSI and SCV Water to kind of verbalize questions, give our first impressions of what we were seeing, and with the hopes of providing some clarification and potentially reducing written comments if we could get that verbal clarification during these meetings. So those were useful discussions. In addition, it helped us kind of prioritize comments in a way. If you get enough modelers in the room, there's going to be different opinions of how things could be done, but there's also a question of, some things could be done now, but other things could wait and be done later. So we would discuss those types of things as well. Following those discussions, the ERP would provide written comments, both to SCV Water and GSI. And then GSI later provided written responses to our comments with an indication of how that comment would be addressed in the final versions of the reports. And lastly, provide a summary report, wrap that all up, and describe the work and the findings and the appropriateness of the model for its intended use. So that was the overall review process. And obviously today we will not be going through all the comments, but just at a very high level here, give you a sense of things. About 70% of the comments focused on really just needing some additional information or clarification on what we were reading. So we kind of broke our comments out into these different themes. Overwhelmingly, most of it was just wanting to make sure we were clear on what we were reading and provided some suggestions on how to enhance, the documentation. And then those remaining comments really focused on those actions that could be considered to improve the model itself, its defensibility, and the reporting from a Sigma compliance perspective, sustainability perspective. And so what I'm doing here is I just grabbed, an example, kind of a summary of some comments from each of the documents, just to give you a feel for the flow and the types of detail, level of detail, the types of comments, and as well as the detail and the responses. So here's an example from the groundwater flow model report. So we had noted that the model underestimates the vertical hydraulic gradients at some of the well locations. And we were asked if we asked if you see this as a serious limitation for supporting the sustainability plan development. And then it'd be good to check and see if there's other significant vertical head differences in other areas. Now, I'm not going to read through these word for word, but I would invite you to kind of look these over. What I really liked with this review process is we would provide quite a few comments and pretty detailed, and I appreciated the care that GSI took in providing responses. So as you can see here, it's not just comment noted, it's providing opinions back and some details on where they felt the vertical gradients looked pretty good. They answered the question, we didn't see it as a limitation, and kind of gave their perspective on how that figure should be reviewed. And so that's, again, just an example from the groundwater flow model report. Here's an example from the water budget report. We're asking how reliable will imported sources of water be in the future. There's no discussion of that associated with imported water, and it'll be important to characterize as part of the GSP. And they provided some good indications here of that reliability and what it's based on. It wasn't discussed in this modeling report, but clearly it has been discussed in detail in other agency reports. So I think the intent is they're going to take part of these responses, and they're making some updates to the model related reports to more clearly state their views on reliability for imported water sources. Let's see, lastly, this one's an example from the SMC, the Sustainable Management Criteria section of the GSP. We had noted that there was a well that was being proposed for a representative monitoring site. But in our workings, we were familiar with this well and indicated that it had been dry through the most recent drought, and that there were some water levels being shown for that particular well in an appendix, and we recommended selecting a different well. And there was agreement, and they had noted that as well after submitting the draft, and for that reason had already decided to drop it. So again, there are many comments, obviously not shown here today, but this is just to give you kind of a feel of kind of the back and forth that we had with GSI. And so the high level conclusions here, we've completed that final summary report actually this week. And in there we described the keyword work and the findings and the suitability of the model. GSI is in the process, they're incorporating the comments into those reviewed documents for the next version that goes out. And in the opinion of the 3 ERP panelists, we feel the model is an appropriate tool to support the GSA. It's being used to develop water budgets for the current, historical, current, and future conditions as required per the SGMA regulations. And it's also being used to guide some decisions regarding the sustainable management criteria. And then I'll just end by noting too, just keep in mind though, this model, although it has recently been updated to a more current platform modeling code with Modflow USG, it certainly is not a new model. This model has been in use for a couple of decades on a variety of problems, and it's just kind of evolved and has benefited from work done by multiple consultants, by the agency, some feedback from regulators through time. So it's a good tool. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown and Mr. Lechler. Mr. Vergoots, do you have anything to add before you move on to board comments and questions?
Thank you, President Natoli. Nothing to add. I think the summary was very good, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I see Vice President Goodsite has her hand raised. First, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I want to say this was an excellent presentation. I seem to remember some questions about why do peer review, and this is exactly what I was hoping for with a peer review process, and I thought it was an excellent summary. appropriate level of detail and everything. So I'm really glad that we did do this and got this information out of it. Just one question. I mean, it looks like, you've stated that the ERP supports the model. Is anyone just verifying that these comments were addressed? It looks like things are still being revised. Is anybody doing a verification to make sure the changes make it in the final? And is there anything that was a sticking point, like where they just said, no, we don't agree, we're not going to do it? Anything that remains a concern of the ERP?
And either Mr. Brown or Mr. Leckler, if you would reply, please.
I'm happy to reply. I first would like to give, Rick, is there anything that you'd like to say before I respond?
Thank you, Nate. I've got some notes down here, but why don't you respond, and I can add in anything if you don't hit it. Well, just one thing real quick, and let me touch on this for Director Gutzeit. Director Gutzeit, agency staff has been working, of course, with the whole team and with the modeler, GSI Water Solutions, and we are doing a couple of things. One, we're looking at the comments, or we have looked at the comments, and we've identified where updates have been needed, and we've made those updates. We're also going to be describing in the admin draft GSP that comes out how the peer review process may have affected any of the information that has previously been provided to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And so we heard that comment from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. It's a great question. They want to know, well, these two things were running in parallel. Can you let us know if the peer review process changed and if it causes the needle to move on any of the GSP, materials that they've already seen? The answer is generally no. The changes have been small, and we will detail it out when we transmit the draft GSP. And so sorry if I kind of jumped in there, Nate, but Nate, why don't you pick up anything that I didn't get?
Yeah, you bet. So the two specific questions I heard asked was, is there a verification step from the ERP to ensure that our comments have been implemented? The short answer on that is no. We basically have wrapped up our final report, and that report includes GSI's, comment by comment, all the responses of how they're going to address it. But yeah, there is no additional step beyond what we've done to confirm. I guess too, just to add to that, just to point out, I think we're not regulators. The ERP, I think we were brought in simply to provide that fresh perspective with the hopes, the overarching goal that, we would improve the process, just give different perspectives. And at the end of the day, help the GSA submit a GSP that has a greater likelihood of looking favorably with DWR. So I feel good about the contributions that the ERP have suggested. And I think at the end of the day, whether we had a verification step or not, I mean, it's ultimately up to DWR and how they're going to review these. So that was my thought on that. In terms of, I think the second question was, were there any major sticking points? And I don't believe so. As I say, it felt like a very collaborative process. I didn't sense during any meetings or the tone of any of the responses that folks were being unnecessarily defensive about anything. I felt like there was good listening back and forth. And I think any of the issues that were perceived to be, more important, higher priority, by the nature of the response, it looked like it was received as such, like, good comment, we're going to make this change to this specific section. So I don't recall any major sticking points. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. And I wanted to say, it's fine if the agency staff is going through and checking, that the comments are being incorporated, just as long as somebody was, because I know sometimes you get a report with recommendations and it goes on the shelf. So
Sure.
Thank you.
That.
Thank you, Vice President Gutzai, and thank you, Mr. Brown. Director Martin.
Thank you, President Natoli. I think this question is probably for Nate, but of course, BJ can jump in at any time. My question for you, well, first of all, I'll say that I'm confident that we have a very talented and capable modeling team, and I think I'm confident we have a very capable and talented peer review team. But I would ask you two questions. One, how would you characterize peer review as a more of a process review or an outcome review? And secondly, how would you differentiate peer review from a detailed independent check of the whole process? If you could just address those two questions, I would appreciate it.
Okay, I'm jotting these down here. So in terms of the first, I want to make sure I'm clear on the question. So process review versus outcome review. I'm not sure I'm appreciating the difference in that question.
Okay, so you are, when we look at of course, you agree that the software and the modeling software is well established and there's confidence in it. And so that once you build the model and run the various scenarios, the outcome kind of falls out. So are you looking at results, or are you looking at the process of building the model and all the assumptions and parameters that go into it, or are you looking at the actual results at all on that one?
Thank you for that clarification. So it's both. So with these, we're trying to kind of come in, having not been involved in the detailed development and of the available data that are out there, which data did GSI and others, decide to ultimately use and after their vetting process. So we kind of look at statements made throughout the process of what was the basis for this parameter or that parameter. And does that feel right? Are there other data sources that, we're aware of that they could have considered? We would provide those suggestions. So we're paying attention to kind of the basis on the input side, and if there was adequate documentation to support some of that. But then also, in particular, the water budget report, that's really focused on, the answers coming out of, the back end of the modeling process. And given what we understand of that geographic area and just the way it is presented, do those numbers seem consistent with everything that was just described on how the thing was put together in the first place? And just does it feel right? And so I'd say soup to nuts, we look at that whole process as part of the review. Now, I should add that we were not tasked with getting the actual model files and providing independent runs. It was solely based on review of those three reports. So there's various levels of review that could take place. And at the most extreme end would be kind of really doing independent runs, confirming, looking at individual answers, if you will, and really seeing, did I get the same result as GSI, and going through step by step. It did not take it to that degree. But in terms of just how it was presented in the report, that was the basis of the review.
Okay, one follow-up question, Nate, has it been your experience when the peer review concludes that the analysis is appropriate for the intended application, that in general, the results would bear that out if you were to run the numbers?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You bet.
Thank you, Director Martin, and thank you, Mr. Brown. I see no other hands raised for the board. Do we have any public comment on this?
We do have one public comment. Actually, we have two public comments. Ms. Lam-Pamback, whenever you're ready.
Hi. Yeah, I am really interested in the model because, of course, it all depends on the data that goes into it. And we did have an issue about a decade ago where the model did not turn out to do what happened in reality was not projected by the model. So as we are facing really some extreme changes in Sierra snowpack and precipitation, I'm really concerned that good information goes into the model. And I was reading recently a article about why the modeling for the return of the lake level in Mono Lake didn't work properly. And it was because they used 20 years of a very wet precipitation season. And then the last 20 years has not been, and we have not had as much precipitation. And I am wondering, when you reviewed that model, whether there was any analysis of precipitation and any reduction in precipitation in the basin that would affect our basin the way Mono Lake was affected by a drier last 2 decades. And it was really substantial because they didn't meet their settlement levels for the lake because there was not enough precipitation to get the water back in. So that could be, really serious in the future in our own basin, with making sure that we don't overdraft our groundwater based on the huge amount of population and housing we're going to supposedly permit in this valley in the future. So I'm just wanting to make sure that precipitation levels were looked at and included in the model. That's where all of that preamble is going.
Sure. No, great question. Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. With these Sigma regulations that came out, there's pretty direct instructions on what's to be done. And one of the biggest things with any of the projections is there to include climate change projections with them. So the process that GSA followed is in compliance with what has been asked in terms of you select enough of a historical period over a long enough period that there's a variety of, normal, wet, multi-year drought types of conditions. And then you take that historical data set, both precipitation and evapotranspiration. This is at a monthly time scale. And then you run it through this process that DWR has made available to those preparing GSPs, where it takes these tools and applies climate change factors on top of that. And so that's the process that GSI followed. So you take this historical period that has a variety of hydrologic conditions in it, you run it through the tool, and then it provides you back those same monthly precipitation and evapotranspiration data, but which has been perturbed, has been modified. And what that essentially does is it changes the timing of when precip falls throughout the year. It affects the moisture conditions, the atmosphere, so those types of things. That has all been incorporated into these projections.
Thank you, Ms. Plambeck, and thank you, Mr. Brown. Additional speakers, Ms. Kang?
Ms. Faulkner, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Uni. Just a quick recap. I didn't hear Director Martin's second question. I only heard part of the answer, and it sounded like a good question. So if you could repeat Director Martin's very last question and answer, that would be great. And then my question is, am I understanding correctly that the peer review was essentially based on data that you were given and not necessarily data that you collected yourself? So basically you're basing this peer review on things that you were told and not things that you saw. And the reason that I ask that is it goes directly to what Ms. Planbeck had said previously, is that we've had bad modeling in the past. And it raises concerns because, of course, I'm the person who keeps saying that they've set the thresholds too low on some of their things. And so I just want this to be successful, and I want the water in our valley to be protected and sustainable for the next generations. I mean, I would love to have my daughter and her children to live in this valley and have an adequate water supply. So I'm concerned about that. And then my last question is, based on the software that you used, will the agency be incurring any costs related to that software or licensing or its use, or after the fact going on into the future, will we be required to purchase or in any way incur any costs associated with the software used that in the review? And that's it. Those are my questions. Did I say that? Do you understand what I mean in the last question?
Last question was the easiest one.
Oh, okay.
Question is very easy. It's the first one referring back to Mr. Martin's second comment.
Yeah, I thought it was a good question, but I missed part of it because my sound cut out for a second, and I'm sad about that.
So quick summary of that, I think it was just a question of, did we focus our review more on the input assumptions, what went into developing the tool, or more on the answers that it was providing? And so my response said both. We were tasked with looking at both. Was there a good basis for how the tool was put together, some of the choices made, and the data that were presented in the report? Did it seem like appropriate data sources? Did it seem like, what was being stated is consistent with our understanding of the stratigraphy and what the hydrogeology includes in the basin? But we also looked at, the specific projections that came out of it and the estimates on the water budget terms. So I hope that answers your question on that. The second one, did their peer review just review what we were told as opposed to independently reviewing data sources? I think was the gist of the question. We were not tasked to go and do an independent study of the raw data that were used. We were basically asked, here are 3 draft reports. From your perspective, knowing that this is to be incorporated into the GSP process, is it in the ERP's judgment that the flow model has been adequately documented and provides a good basis for what's in it, and do the results make sense? Is it suitable for its intended use? So we reviewed what was given to us, and that was the end of that. So there was no independent review of raw data that went into it. I think the third question, would there be ongoing costs related to software licenses? The answer is no. The main code that solves all the equations is free to the public. Anyone can go download that. That's called ModFlow USG. It's not for the faint of heart. It's specialized technical software that would need to be, driven by someone who's trained in hydrogeology. So the tools themselves and the licensing would need to be run by a consultant or someone that knows how to use it. So if there's any cost, it would just be a consultant related cost to use the software, because it's that type of software. It's highly technical, but there's no license fee per se that would pass on to the agency. The only other thing I'd say at a high level, looking at models that have made projections in the past and at later points in time, noting that there's differences. I mean, those differences are okay. I guess one thing to keep in mind, just philosophy of why do we model? It's about insights. In this case, there's projections being made over a 50-year period, and it's following all the guidelines provided by DWR. And thankfully, what DWR has done here, they've given agencies a 20-year grace period. So anyone that's not sustainable, any of the basins that are not sustainable, you have 20 years to get things figured out and get on track. And at every 5 years, there's an additional assessment. And so these GSPs are going to be updated at least every 5 years. And what will happen at every 5 years is, here we are today, we're projecting out 50 years. Well, 5 years from now, there's going to be a 5-year period of that projection of those future forecasts that become the past. So as this thing progresses, those projections are going to be replaced with actual data. So just keep that in mind, that there's no way anyone can get everything right in terms of projecting the future with absolute certainty, because that's simply not possible. But I think they've applied good science here, and the process, thankfully, is set up that every 5 years adjustments can be made. And like this current drought that we're in right now, 5 years from now, we'll see. I sure hope to God we're out of it. But certainly we'll have 5 years of actual data that will be replaced, and then some additional projections will be made based off that point in time. So keep in mind there are some things in place with the process that it's not like you have to make forecasts today and then everyone has to live with it for the next 30 years. It's an evolving process. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Ms. Fortner. Ms. Cattell?
Ms. Cattell, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I was muted until just now. Thank you very much. Very quickly, to go back to the modeling, and of course, nobody gets the projections 100% certainty because they're just projections and you're extrapolating from past data, except that the past data might be flawed because we are in a climate crisis where we have more hotter, drier years, some of the hottest on record. And I was wondering if you could explain to me how you have taken that into account, if there's a certain algorithm that you might use to show that the pattern might be more drought, more dry years, and hotter temperatures, more evaporation. Thank you.
Is that a question for Mr. Brown, or is that a question for Mr. Beergoots?
Actually, either one can answer it. I'm happy with either one. Probably the hydrologist.
Nate, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So in this case, the technique that was used by GSI, there's a couple of options. The technique that has been taken by GSI in this case was to look at, as I mentioned, a historical period that included a variety of hydrologic conditions, including some multi-year droughts. And then you take that period, and again, it's monthly precipitation and reference evapotranspiration data. You take those data, run it through DWR's tool, and it gets adjusted. The monthly precip and reference ET gets adjusted based on climate conditions from a variety of global climate models. And that's what's ultimately used for the projection. So, and in 5 years from now, as I say, we're looking at today moving forward. I guess the next 5 years, for the next 5-year assessment, we're going to see what kind of climate actually laid out, between now and the next 5 years. And those data that historical period will replace the projection data, and because it's become the past. So it's not as though this condition that we're in right now is, from a planning perspective, is going to kind of, I guess, make or break, if you will, the process. That the point of this whole thing is to make sure that the process is considering a variety of conditions that's going to challenge, the ability of agencies to meet water demands. And so that's really the bottom line. As long as there is an appropriate variety of hydrology, including multi-year droughts, and considerations on limitations on imports and that type of thing, as long as that stuff is being folded into the planning process, then the insights that are gained from those projections are going to be good for establishing projects and management actions and setting sustainable management criteria. And again, as part of 5-year assessments, if there's observations, because keep in mind, there is very, strict is the right word, but the GSA is required to collect monitoring data from here on out. And it's not model projections that are going to decide sustainability. It's the collection of those monitoring data and the processing of those monitoring data are going to be the quote unquote proof. And so I would offer that as well. It's not model projections that decide sustainability. It's processing of actual data on a year-to-year basis that's going to be used to demonstrate whether the basin is sustainable. So hope that answers the question. Rick, feel free to jump in.
No, I think you got it, Nate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cattell, and thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other public comments?
It looks like Ms. Cattell has her hand up again, but she did have her 3-minute comment already.
All right, then we will move on. Any final comments or questions from the board? Because I have one administrative comment I'd like to make that's not specifically about the topic, but it is about the agenda. There was not anything in the agenda packet for item 3.3, and then it would be helpful to me because I thought maybe I'd missed something, or who knows, maybe that didn't make it into the scanner on the copier. Maybe it got stuck. So it might be helpful, even if there's an item where there are no documents submitted or an attachment for it. I think one of the purposes of these memos is to let people know what's going to be discussed. And I know technically posting the agenda does that and informs the public, but it would be nice, even on an item like this, where go ahead and put the header in and you just quickly, almost like agenda text, like for a planning commission meeting or a city council meeting, where it basically just quickly in a few sentences says what the item is that's going to be discussed. And that way members of the public will have an idea, a better idea perhaps of what's coming up. And I know it would be more helpful to me just to have something there and not to worry about whether something has been missed or didn't get scanned. So I would appreciate it. Moving on to item 3.4. This is an information item, status update of sustainable groundwater management plan implementation activities. Mr. Vergoots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. I will open up my screen here. Goodness, that was painful. Okay, fortunately, I only have about 3 slides on this item. And I'll go through relatively quickly. And we have a couple items on here where we talk about outreach. And so Tara and Kathy Martin are also able to chime in here as needed. So quick highlights. As you've deduced, there's been a ton of technical work that's been ongoing since our last update to your committee. The board memo describes the various technical reports that have been prepared and submitted and reviewed with the stakeholder committee. We did have a meeting with the stakeholder committee a couple months back where we talked with them about the sustainable management criteria. We actually held a special meeting with them for them to deliberate and let us know if they thought we were on the right track with establishing the sustainable management criteria with minimum thresholds and triggers. They voted to support it, but there was one dissenting vote cast. You've heard about peer review today. We did get the county site access agreement, which is good news. So we now have the city and the county. We're preparing a schedule to get out in the field and install equipment. We continued to take input from the public on the documents, tech memos, the workshops, and also a internal draft GSP was prepared and submitted to the team for review. And let's see, Tara or Kathy, maybe you could talk a little bit about outreach here.
Well, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so for this look ahead and look back, our outreach has followed the same cycle that we've used for our other workshops topics. We completed the process on project and management actions, going through the SAC meetings, the pre-meetings, the workshop itself, the public workshop, and the debrief afterwards. Coming up, we are fleshing out our outreach schedule for the release of the draft GSP plan, and definitely stepping up our outreach efforts even more, both at the timing of the release of the draft plan for the 60-day public comments, and as well as a flurry of outreach and advertising leading up to the public hearing where this board will consider it for adoption. I think that's the highlights, Rick, unless someone
Great.
has a specific question.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. We'll keep going, unless President Natoli, your board has questions right now. Oh, you're muted.
I should just leave it unmuted the entire time. I don't see any hands raised on behalf of the board. Do we have any public comment?
Rick, are you done with your presentation?
No, I'm not, Uni.
Okay.
I just thought I'd check in to see if there were questions on what Kathy said, President Natoli, before we moved on.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. On to fiscal and grants. We have, of course, continued to prepare the grant reports, seek reimbursement. Today, we've received about $755,000 back from DWR for the GSP development, so that's good news. 6-month look ahead, and Kathy alluded to this, and I wanted to share the schedule that's in your board memo. Not that I want to go over it in great detail, but it's important, and there are a lot of things that are taking place. Kathy mentioned a couple of them about outreach. So mid-July, we will provide an early admin draft to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We will meet with them, then get their input. Then we'll release the public draft GSP. We'll have a workshop on the 25th of August. We will provide the 90-day notice of public hearing that's required for the regs. We have to send written notice to the city and the county, so we'll be doing that. The last scheduled Stakeholder Advisory Committee is September 8th. Committee meeting, that is September 8th. That will be a debrief from the workshop, which has been our process all along, is meet with them, hold the workshop, have a debrief. The 60-day public review period for the draft GSP will end And Uni, I have a typo here. I think that's October 15th, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. It's October 15th.
We are proposing, and this is the next item, so I won't get into it. A special meeting October 20th. The final GSP will be prepared November 22nd with a summary of changes. Outreach will continue, and we're anticipating a special GSA board meeting in mid-December for your board to consider the GSP, and then it would be submitted to DWR after that. And so along the way, we'll be checking in with the stakeholder committee and your board as we move down the road here. And we also had some interesting discussions at the previous SAC meeting. Those meetings have yielded a number of interesting discussions, and we highlighted some of them in the board memo today. There were discussions about thresholds, whether or not they were too high or too low. We had one member thought that they were set too low, that they should be set higher. Another member said, well, if you set them too high, just arbitrarily, then you're maybe turning off pumping, having to buy a more expensive state water project unnecessarily. And so good dialogue with the committee on this, the stakeholder committee, and different interests are shown and conveyed. But the discussions have been very good. We had a good discussion about the peer review and the flow model at the committee last time. We also had discussions about land surface elevations in the basin, the role of tectonics, groundwater extraction, etc., and land subsidence. So we're pleased with the discussions that have been taking place at the SAC, and we appreciate all their input. In terms of challenges, hey, we've got the access agreements now. We're making plans to go in the field, at least on this side of Interstate 5. 5 Point, the downstream property owner, is moving forward with evaluating and I believe installation of piezometers. So we will continue to coordinate with them moving forward. I think all these are positive things. Financial, we are on track with the budget. There is some pressure on the piezometer costs, but there are a few things in flux, so we continue to evaluate that. And other than that, we are just keeping going. We're meeting our deadlines. We're getting the reports out and getting a lot of good input from the stakeholder committee. And within the next 6 months, the draft GSP will be out, and we expect your board will be considering final approval of the draft or of the final GSP. So that concludes my update, President Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Vergoots. Do we have any questions or comments from the board? Director Martin.
Thank you, President Natoli. Not a question, just a shout out to Rick and staff. This has been an awful long road in a basically an uncharted area. Even though we've managed our basin over the years, this is new territory for everyone, and I just appreciate the efforts you've made to reach the deadline and be ready to submit the GSP in December. So I say thank you for your effort and that of the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Martin.
Thank you, Director Martin. I don't see any other board comments. Do we have any comments from members of the public?
We do have a public comment. Ms. Cattell, whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much. This applies to this particular overview also, because you did not answer my question earlier, and I did get a chance to tell you that. So I'd like to mention that when you're relying on, that you are relying on historical data, and in light of climate change, are you using a climate warming algorithm to enhance your projections? And that would be a yes or no. And following on that, if we found ourselves still in drought next year and possibly the year after, can all of this be amended?
Okay. President Tully, shall I?
Yes, please, Mr. Virgoots, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Cattell. Yes, the modeling includes a climate change factor. It's required to by the regs. It includes it. You'll see in the draft water budget, and we presented before, we've moved it forward with and without climate change as required. And gosh, I am embarrassed. My brain just let go of your second question, Ms. Cattell. President Natoli, can you help me there?
Yeah, yes, it related to, this is historical data and how will we be able to amend this?
Oh, thank you. Right. Right, Ms. Cattell, you were asking what if the drought conditions keep continuing? Can we amend things? Yes.
Mr. Virgoots, won't we have actions in place that we can implement before that, within that 5-year review period though? I mean, I'm also someone who's been concerned about the low threshold levels, but we don't need to wait for the 5-year review to plug those data in. We could make changes in 2 years if we felt that was necessary, correct?
That's right, President Natoli. And we have processes in place that allow those kinds of reviews of the criteria and potential revisions to be moved forward if necessary.
All right, thank you. Are there any other public comments or comments from the board?
There is no other public comment at this time.
Very well, thank you. And again, this is an information item and no action is required. Item 3.5 is an action item. Approval of postponement of the GSA's regular board meeting from October 4th, 2021 to October 20th, 2021. Mr. Virgoots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. As we've talked about it a little bit already today, we have a public process going forward with the GSP review and the closing of the public comment period. The timing is such that the public comment period is scheduled to close just after our next regularly scheduled board meeting. And so we're recommending that we change the next board meeting from October 4th to the 20th to allow staff to report to your board the nature of public comments that we've received. And so you have a complete picture. So our recommendation is to reschedule the meeting in October to the 20th.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Virgoots. Director Martin.
Thank you, President Natoli. This is just a point of order. I'm just curious, does this require a board action? Can't the board chair, in working with staff, basically cancel the regular meeting and call for a special meeting at the date that's proposed? Perhaps this is a question for Mr. Bunn.
Yes, staff. What is our allowable procedure here? Is it because, did we already identify October 4th as the next date? I don't recall.
We did. And Mr. Martin, and I will defer to Tom Bunn because I do not know the legal rules here.
I don't know either. I'm sorry to say, I need to look back at the bylaws. I believe we do have a regular schedule for meeting, and I would suggest that the board take an action in this case. There's no harm in doing so.
I'm inclined to agree with our counselor simply because I thought I recall we do adopt a schedule, and unless an item is being continued, that there is no harm in taking a vote to change a scheduled date. All right, any other questions or comments from the board? I see none. And do we have any public comment on this item? I also see none. Then I ask for a motion and a second to change our next board meeting from October 4th, 2021 to October 20th, 2021. And that meeting on the 20th would start at 2 o'clock instead of our regular 2:30.
So moved, Atkins.
Second, good site.
Ms. Kang, will you take the roll?
Dr. Atkins, your vote?
Yes.
Dr. Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Dr. Gibbs, your vote? Director Gibbs, your vote? Okay, I'll come back to Director Gibbs. Vice President Gutzeit, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
Yes.
Director Reidman, your vote?
Yes.
President Natoli, your vote?
Aye.
Director Gibbs, your vote? It looks like Director Gibbs has logged off of our meeting right now. I'm not sure if he has technical difficulties or not, but this item still passes.
Very well, thank you. We're in the agenda, moving on to section 4. The board is now going into closed session to discuss item 4.1 as announced on the agenda. The public may stay on the Zoom webinar. Board members and appropriate staff will need to disconnect from this Zoom webinar and connect to the closed session meeting. Once the closed session is over, the board will reconnect to the Zoom webinar for closed session announcements and the remaining items on the agenda. So board members and appropriate staff are logging off at this time. Folks, everyone can stay logged on and we'll be back as soon as we can. Thank you. Back into, we're coming back into session here. So we'll wait just another minute or so for folks to get out of closed and come into open. Was Vice President Virgutz coming back into open session?
Yes, I believe she was.
Okay.
You mean Gutzeit?
Is that not what I said? What did I say?
Yeah.
I think you said Virgut.
The other German name.
Did I say Virgutz?
It's okay.
I understand you. You said Vice President. I know who that is.
Okay. I'm in pain, and so it makes you forget things.
Well, at least you didn't say very good site.
I'm surprised I didn't.
Little slap happy at the end of the meeting here.
Director Reidman's just back in. I think we're just waiting on Vice President Gutzeit.
I show 7 attendees left in the meeting.
Okay.
Hmm.
Very good. She may be having issues connecting. We'll wait just a tad longer. Ms. Kang, I know you're a very busy person during these meetings. Would you please send an email to the Vice President and ask her if there's some connection issues or?
Ms. President, I've texted Ms. Gutzeit and I said, will you be joining us on Zoom? She says, I can't get in. If you have a quorum, go ahead.
All right, thank you, thank you, thank you. The board is back in open session. Ms. Kang, please take the roll.
Director Atkins, are you present?
Present.
Director Martin, are you present?
Present.
Director Redmond, are you present?
Present.
President Natoli, are you present?
Yes.
And I believe Director Cooper, Director Gibbs, and Vice President Gutzeit was unable to return.
All right, that's half of us. Are we considered, is that considered a quorum then?
We still have 4.
4 of the 8. Do we
Yes,
need
4 is a
Oh,
quorum.
there's 7.
Oh, very good, very good. Moving on to item 5, then closed session announcements. Mr. Bunn, please proceed.
Madam President, members of the Board of Directors met in closed session under section 54956.9 to discuss the matter listed in the agenda, and no reportable action was taken under the Brown Act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bunn. Item 6 is a request for future agenda items. Do the board members have any requests for future agenda items? Director Martin? I
No.
saw you.
No, sorry.
Yes, Director Atkins.
I'd like to hear about the Bouquet Creek situation, if it's appropriate. Mr. Cole might have some information at the next meeting. I'm hoping he does, and I'd like an update on what the Department of Water and Power is going to be doing with the water flows in Bouquet Creek. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And then I would like to know, since we're getting to the point where close to being able to review the draft GSP and submitting that to DWR, what comes next? So Mr. Virgutz, if we could just sort of get a timeline of what happens next, what happens after submittal, then after I don't know what DWR calls it, whether they certify the GSP. So basically over the next year, what will we be looking at doing as a board?
Thank you, President Natoli. So after your board considers this is for a future item.
Yes,
Yeah.
future agenda item.
Excuse me, future item, yes. We will put that together.
Very good, thank you. Anything else from any of our board members? Right, seeing none, the next item on the agenda is adjournment. And as discussed earlier, the Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency will be adjourned to October 20th, 2021, and that is a 2 p.m. meeting. Thank you, everybody, for participating and everyone who contributed to making the meeting work today. It takes a town to do an online meeting like this, and I appreciate everyone's input and help. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Have a great
Thank
summer,
you.
everybody.
Thank you all.
All right.